There's one thing that they still haven't taken away from everyone that is the ultimate in monetary value, and that is barter. That is the original, and it'll always be around. So even if they stripped your bank account of everything that was in there, if you had certain items, per se, valuable items, you're always going to be able to trade those items for other items. So they can't take away barter. And what's weird is maybe we shouldn't be waiting for some event to start doing that.
I mean, Ukraine, that is a breadbasket for the world, but it's now quite contaminated with depleted uranium rounds. You got all kinds of shrapnel laying everywhere, unexploded ordnance. You got all the roads ripped up. None of the fences are intact. Irrigation's broken to smithereens. Cities are smashed into rubble. How long do you think they're going to take to bring that back on to where it's going to bring out 30 million tons of grain again? That's wishful thinking if you think it would get done even in 5 years. What will a post-reset world look like? Well, if anything, indication shows us what they're trying to force us into so quickly. We must be on a timeline, and what kind of world would it really look like on the other side? Because we're coming into some geologic upheaval here in October, at least an electromagnetic event that will raise tides anywhere from 2 to 3 times higher, and that seems to be why an enormous amount of focus is on shipping disruptions right now. There needs to be explained away why the oceans are now devoid of goods, or is it truly the last seconds they have for continuity of government preparedness? As we see a behemoth of goods and ships and planes moving across the planet in unison, with a full excuse behind, they're preparing for war. Also, other things are disappearing from trade routes. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just being rediverted in the continuity of what would be preparation of government. All preparing for what should be the question. Perhaps this post-world reset is what they're preparing for to maintain control after such an event. So anyway, Ransom, appreciate you joining me. The world has been flipped on the script. Tucker, the interview's out. I haven't watched it, but what a coup that was in the media. They are losing their minds. So that just gives you the indication they're losing their minds about the climate because they can't control it, because fact is no longer important. Have you seen the new definition of climate change denial? Is not that you have facts that say Iceland, Greenland, the Arctic are not losing ice as quickly as forecast and actually regaining some ice. Now facts no longer matter. Your denial is because you don't think it's urgent enough. So facts have gone out the window. It doesn't matter if you have a fact where you can debate with a fact and say, hey, climate scientist, you on the paid side of things with your hockey shtick, you're going against facts. Your facts are actually wrong because these facts that we have is real determined facts and data. Oh, well, that doesn't matter anymore because you denied that it's the urgency of it. That's where they're trying to box people in. So you see, wherever you're going, we're getting boxed into corners. So, Ransom, thanks for joining. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I got to watch half that interview with Putin, and he basically said a bunch of stuff that any regular person can do a little research and verify what he said. He didn't get outlandish. He gave a basic history of Russia.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. On January 23, 1959, 10 hikers set out for a winter hiking and camping trip through Russia's Ural Mountains. One of their group had turned back after several days for medical reasons, but the other 9 continued along with their trip. The 9 hikers' bodies were later found mutilated in complete disarray, radioactive and dead. Most were students or graduates of Ural Polytechnical Institute. The goal of the 14-day expedition was to reach Otorten, a mountain 12 miles north of the site of the incident. This route at that season was estimated as Category 3, the most difficult. All members were experienced in long ski tours and mountain expeditions. However, when the bodies were found, 5 students appeared to have died from hypothermia. The remaining 4 hikers had even more inexplicable injuries. One had a fractured skull, another had a twisted neck. 2 were missing their eyes, and one of the bodies with no eyes was also missing her tongue. The searchers found the abandoned and badly damaged tent on Kholat Syakhl. Mikhail Sharavin, the student who found the tent, said, "The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind." Investigators said the tent had been cut open from inside and that skiers had fled in socks or barefoot. A chain of 8 or 9 sets of footprints, left by several people who were wearing socks, a single shoe or barefoot, could be followed and led down towards the edge of nearby woods. At the forest edge, under a large old cedar, the search party found the remains of a fire, along with the first 2 bodies, those of Yuri Krivoshenko and Yuri Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high. The medical examiner recorded livor mortis on the back, but Krivoshenko was found facing up. This indicated that someone had moved them after their death. On February 27th, between the cedar and the tent, the searchers found Igor Dyatlov and Zenaida Kolmogorova, and 6 days later, on March 5th, Rustem Slobodin. The 3 seemed to have died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. A medical examination found no injuries which might have led to their deaths, and it was concluded that they had died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. A legal inquest started immediately after finding the first 5 bodies. Searching for the remaining 4 hikers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on May 5th under 4 meters of snow in a ravine 50 meters farther into the woods from the cedar tree. These 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that those who had died first had apparently relinquished their clothes to the others. Thibaut Brignol was wearing Dubynina's fur coat and hat. Dubynina's was wearing a brown sweater that tested radioactive and was most probably Krivoshenko's. Zolotaryov had Doroshenko's hat, and Kolevatov was wearing Doroshenko's overalls. The waistband of his sweater and lower part of his ski trousers tested radioactive. An examination of the 4 bodies found in May changed the course of the whole investigation. 3 of them had fatal injuries. The body of Thibaut Brignol had major skull damage, and both Dubynina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. According to Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high. He compared it to the force of a car crash. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds, as if they were crippled by a high level of pressure. Dubynina was found to be missing her tongue. But things were about to get even more bizarre. Bodies were actually found a few feet from their improvised shelter in the deep part of the ravine. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it is known, remains a contentious and unsolved mystery. Theories ranging from secret weapons, an attack by Yetis, a UFO encounter, and there's even a theory regarding geometry of the mountain combining with wind to produce infrasound in sufficiently high levels to induce panic and hysteria. But what really happened? Seemingly something terrified these skiers so much they fled from their campsite. What it was, no one knows. But something possibly violent happened, some say supernatural or out of this world. The Dyatlov Pass incident is still one of the great mysteries in the histories. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28+ years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. Call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.
And now on with the video.
And then he started talking about all of the deals, negotiations, and other things like that over the last couple decades that Russia, since the fall of the Soviet Union, has made with NATO. And then in true Western fashion, all of those things have been broken. And it's like he's just saying stuff that is kind of unarguable, yet the American media and all the pundits, they're working overtime. They're mad that the guy even went over there and did it. And think about this. what a weird backwards future we're already in. You know, like if we went back to the 1980s and you talked to someone and then you showed them what it was like now, they would be convinced that the powers of the world had switched places. And then on that side of the planet, Putin is bragging about trying to open up his free market system, expand his population, have peace. It's obvious to me as an American that our country is the one that is initiating a worldwide conflict using NATO. And the topic there is this great reset. They want to reset it. They want to realign the map. They want to change the power structure from any last remaining nation states. Well, what that means is also nationalities, obviously. So there's a little bit to be said there. They're shifting the powers of people all over the world, but in a weird direction, not into a more open society. Instead, we seem to be going in the opposite direction right now. It seems like we're right at the precipice of the changeover. And I'm convinced, you know, at first I thought it would be more back to the feudal system. They're not just trying to separate us into serfs and governors and overlords and things like that. They are literally trying to create two distinct peoples on the planet Earth. One of them would be them, the transhumanist gods. And, you know, the more I look into how all of the areas of Europe, all of the Western world that seems to be going down a weird position of failure at the moment. And then you combine that with what you're seeing in Europe as far as the farmers' rebellions. If you saw today, some of the world leaders took credit for those protests, claiming that those farmers out there are protesting climate change. I don't think that's what it is. But regardless of that, what I'm seeing is a preemptive strategy to destroy Europe. But then when you see farmers tearing up roads and the entire infrastructure in question now, not only by the world elite that are pushing these measures to shut down farmers, shut down agriculture, and basically shut down all of the activities of the human domain. In the backdrop, they are setting up redundancy programs like rewilding all of these areas and putting Pleistocene animals back on the scene, megafauna that's still alive and some that are extinct. And these plans are going on all over the world. They're happening in Russia, in the Siberia area. They're happening in Europe. They're happening in the Americas. Matter of fact, right here where I live, we're in full throttle, where you can see several decades of a program that they did by bringing the African oryx here to the valley I live in several decades ago. And now they're found from Texas to Arizona. And what they were initially, the idea was that they were going to do trophy hunting, allegedly. But instead, it seems like they've used that megafauna animal to replace the niche of the bison that once roamed in these valleys to eat, periodically moving back and forth nomadically through the plains and back down into where I live. They're doing these programs everywhere. And at the same time, the technological end of it, they have pretty much shown us, the public, if you've been paying attention, that they have perfected the idea of creating a human-like entity. Gattaca, the movie, would be a good example of that. We're getting to that spot now, and it seems like if you just put all of these different programs together, that they are in preparation for the massive population reduction event to move into the next phase. That'll be the post-reset world. And what would that look like? Well, according to what they're proposing now, it would be very few cities located across the continents where people may not be able to travel between or communicate between. In other words, that these places will be compartmentalized, not unlike feudalistic areas would be compartmentalized under their lordship or the king or whatever was going on in that area. And everywhere you look, you're going to see signs of trade shutting down. Right now, we're importing more from Mexico than from China, which is a major sign that there's going to be an economic conflict between us and China. Because think about it, if we did have a disagreement and trade was shut off, this giant vacuum in America and Western countries, slowly over the decades, they stopped producing any products in-house, so to speak, or in-country, where they've given their sovereignty and the power of their belly to multinational conglomerates and deals and trades and things like that. So they're not in control of their food anymore. So the only thing that can or will happen is people are going to have to seize back at least the area in which they live in and start growing food for themselves, because this future that seems to be two populations, one of the haves and the other transhuman on the lower end, like the lower package where you're being ran like ants, and on the upper end is where the control mechanisms are at. So it only makes sense that you would make megacities and clear out nature to be nature. And that would be the new serfdom. And once it's at that technological point, unless something major happened from the sun that they had not calculated stronger than they anticipated, then I think it would be a permanent setup from that point on, because at that point they would control who is born, when, and how many of them, and where they live.
When the elite will be under their gravitational birthing at that time too, just as they are today. You know, Ransom and I have talked about this before. Those born into very low magnetic field times, as in solar minimums, have extended lifespans. Now, if you look at the crew that has lived to be 100 years old, they were born into the centennial minimum, which was early 1910s to, say, 1915. Anybody in that era from, say, 1910, say, 1917, it was bouncing off the bottom there, lived to be 100, 101 years old. You know, there's a lot of older people that had wealth and power that lived to be 99 or 100 routinely. Now, if you had your generation that was programmable, where the worker ants, technocratic, low package worker ants, 6th grade education, everything running on their credits, then you could even turn off the air eventually. I bet you have to put an air pack on that can be programmed. You won't be able to breathe the air of the earth. You'll probably have to wear some headset that's controllable through tokens. And if you don't do the bidding of the state, they'll turn off your air. But then you got to realize you can just rip the mask off and breathe the air. They'll probably program everybody. The air is poisonous. Don't even try it. You'll die in a second. You have to pay for your air. But the extinction was coming anyway. What do you think? You hit it on the head when you said these locations seem to be in these Western nations that are at certain latitudes. Well, this grand solar minimum was going to knock crop production down anyway to below manageable levels where we could grow enough food to even feed the populace at 7 billion people. Grand solar minimum was going to knock what you consider 45 degree north up to the Arctic and anywhere 45 south down to the Antarctic to near zero levels. I'm not going to say completely gone. Nothing goes to zero completely. But if you reduce crop yields 90% out of some of our biggest grain baskets on the planet, then what? Well, the carrying capacity of our own Earth right here would be diminished unless you find a new growing zone like Central Africa or the Sahel, North Africa. But how rapidly could you set that grow zone up to bring on massive production? I mean, Ukraine, that is a breadbasket for the world, but it's now quite contaminated with depleted uranium rounds. You got all kinds of shrapnel laying everywhere, unexploded ordnance. You got all the roads ripped up. None of the fences are intact. Irrigation's broken to smithereens. Cities are smashed into rubble. How long do you think they're going to take to bring that back on to where it's going to bring out 30 million tons of grain again? That's wishful thinking if you think it would get done even in 5 years. The speed at which we're heading into some of these electromagnetic changes, see, that's the thing. These elite or this World Economic Forum crew, along with the Vatican and their libraries extensively, personal collections for those with money, they have that knowledge of when these cycles are repeating and what the anticipated effects when the cycle's onset will be and in which latitudes. And they understand the cycles far greater than we do. And they have instrumentation. They pay for, a lot of these satellite programs across the world, either monitoring the sun or monitoring the magnetic field on the planet. They get the data. There's so much of it that's private, institutional, national security data, like the Swarm satellite set that they quit printing a couple years ago because the South Magnetic Anomaly And other magnetic anomalies were starting to begin over off of Indonesia, and they didn't want you to see that. So the data still comes in, we're just not privy to it. So somebody's crunching the numbers and seeing where these magnetic field changes are occurring on our planet much faster. So now add all this up into extinction event, well, not complete extinction, but a very large drawdown in population, both animal and human both, based on food carrying capacity in areas where food could be grown. Now, if I take away 90% of all the food grown 45 north and above, that includes the grain belts of Canada, parts of the grain belt in the United States, takes away some of the grain belt in Europe, although they're much further north. It'll knock some off of Russia and China also in Heilongjiang area. We're talking about all the major producers of grains would be hit. And then 45 south, then we're talking about Australia, Chile, these types of places, that South Africa, where they start to grow a lot of corn, wheat, soybean. If you're going to take those numbers down just in those areas, 60 to 90%, depending on where you go, how far more north you proceed where the grain growing is, like barley and wheat and things, you can extend up into Canada past the border to 55 north or something. That'll go to zero. Right down on the Canadian-American border, when you get down into some of those states that are in between wheat and barley, sometimes they're putting in their millets. They might get around 60% losses. But overall, when you look at the planet, that is a very significant amount of crop loss, and that shakes and rattles civilization at its core, because you cannot have people paying that much of their wages just to eat without it seriously upsetting society. If our food cost triples, quadruples, 5x, and the energy is doing something in tandem, then people, even if they work a full-time job, would not have enough money for energy, food, and rent. That wouldn't even cover that. It would not cover those three basics. Then you have civil upheaval. Somebody knows the civil upheaval was coming anyway. Whether they want to or not, nature's more powerful. The cycles of the sun, the cycles that run through our civilization at the change of the age, from Taurus to Aries to Pisces to where we sit now in Aquarius, those are unstoppable forces through the universe and the spiral arm of our galaxy, further into the Hunab Ku in the center, pulsing those energy waves out on 12,000-year cycles. You know, there's something so much more powerful than anything that we have either with our own sun or even in our regional star system area here. These are unstoppable cycles. But if you knew it was inbound, then it takes us to the next thing. What would you do? Well, you'd prepare. And you're watching this scripted. They don't call it the theater of war for nothing. This is pure theater that you're seeing in the Middle East. Yes, I know there's real bombs dropping. But it is so limited. And it is so scripted. And it is so well maneuvered on the chessboard to get the exact outcome that they needed to stop shipping through the Red Sea. That gives ultimate excuse for higher fuel prices, gives the ultimate excuse why goods just stop on a dime being delivered anywhere on the planet. It gives a great excuse why you can move an entire armada of anything in the air or on sea. Well, you know, on sea for us normally call that cargo shipping. Where's all the goods going to? What are they preparing for is more the question. The Arctic century abounds. It starts. Russia and China with their nuclear icebreakers running the northern route. Western powers not allowed to run the route. They're discussing insurance rates between China and Russia now for their container shipping in the Arctic route. What do they know about a changing climate that we are not being told about? You don't build nuclear icebreakers because you just wake up Tuesday and feel like it. And not just one, 23, or actually 22 because they just completed a new one. 22 more nuclear icebreakers are slated to be built and completed in under 10 years in St. Petersburg. Now, what is that telling you? What do they know that route is going to be so important to keep open that they're building specialized vessels for that? Something significant is going on in terms of a cycle that is going to greatly disrupt what we have set up over the last 200 years to keep our civilization functioning, fine-tuned to a point. But the one thing that you hit on there, Ransom, I wanted to also tell a personal story. You know, if it does come to this, where they're able to get away with the reset and then get everybody onto the digital currencies, I ended up talking to a banker who's actually a friend of mine. Originally was just asking some questions about moving money because I needed to move some money, and the bank transfers were taking so long, and I didn't want to have to use like wire transfer and spend the fees for the SWIFT system. So anyway, we started talking about different, like Zelle and these. And I said, what about this Pays wallet? I've heard about this coming up, and like 8 or 9 of the biggest banks in America are using or starting to integrate Pays. But here's the thing. It's a FedNow individual numbered account for everybody. FedNow, everybody in America, whether you know it or not, has been issued an individual numbered account as a bank account, which will be deposited directly into from the Federal Reserve. It's kind of like your Social Security number. But every one of us has one of those if you're a U.S. citizen. The Federal Reserve is going to deposit the money and take over control of your quote-unquote bank account. Now, my question was, when I get paid today in a U.S. dollar, and it goes through your Phase system, and then it deposits into your bank, and then you kick me out a Fed coin on the back, you're giving me a different currency. They're not the same currency. They might be called a dollar, but I assure you it is as different as an apple and an orange. So when I take my apples and I put them in the bank and I want to keep them as apples, I don't want to turn them into oranges. How can I make sure that my apples stay apples? Because I do not want the conversion to happen automatically if I deposit a check. I want to keep my apples an apple. I don't want it automatically converted to an orange. And he's like, man, this thing is so new for us. We don't even know what's going on ourselves right now. Now, the Phase or the Pays wallet is not active yet. At the bank branch management level and higher up in that regional level, still don't understand it. So if they're able to switch us over into a new currency, the Fed token or the Fed coin, or whatever, a USA token is not a USA dollar. It is not. It is as different as a Bitcoin and Ethereum. How will we move through this society if you're going to have to get permission to spend? The ability for you to prepare. Governments are taking entire militaries under the guise of theater, again, smoke and mirrors, to move as much goods across the oceans for continuity of government preparedness for this October event. Then where do you sit? And where do I sit in the whole thing?
I like the idea of, having to think about all of the different aspects of a changeover, all of the things that you would need to get to that point. And I don't know if they're waiting on the sun or they're waiting on a specific, numerical code that they want to do something. And I actually think it's irrelevant to like a natural disaster scenario. I think they just know that certain cycles bring more of those. So no matter what disaster happens naturally, they are in a position to use that as part of their ongoing plan. And I wanted everybody to hear some of these key points about this megafauna restoration. So we know that they're going to have a new currency of some kind. And speaking of that, the answer to not having your apples become oranges is to change your apples into oranges at your own whim. In other words, there's one thing that they still haven't taken away from everyone that is the ultimate in monetary value, and that is barter. That is the original, and it'll always be around. So even if they stripped your bank account of everything that was in there, if you had certain items, per se, valuable items, you're always going to be able to trade those items for other items. So they can't take away barter. And what's weird is maybe we shouldn't be waiting for some event to start doing that. And maybe if, you live in the South and you grow a bunch of watermelons and okra and this and that, you should find a friend that lives somewhere in the North. And when you drive up there at the opposite season, they harvested other stuff, and you can just keep trading goods for goods. That's something that the governments of the world hate. They've gone out of their way and strive to make sure that people never use barter. Instead, they use their paper currencies, and now it's becoming a digital currency. we're in the post-2020 era. In other words, hindsight is 2020 vision. And now that 2020 is over, the occult is over. And now everything's out in the open. They have no problem telling you what they're going to do. And this fits into that. Article from Rewilding Europe is called Megafauna Restoration is a Legal Obligation. Now, keep this in mind when you think about all of the legal loopholes that they're putting farmers and the producers of goods in Europe and other places through, trying to shut them down, from restricting energy to trying to say that they're toxifying the planet with normal everyday gases that feed plants. I wanted to skip down to this part where it talks about it. So, according to these guys, 2021 to 2030, and remember I mentioned Agenda 2030 and, all of the crazy maps and plans that they have for that. But that's kind of an obsolete, out there, open to the public idea. They've improved on this idea since then. So 2021 to 2030 has been declared the decade on ecosystem restoration by the United Nations and the European Union. And they've set ambitious restoration targets of its own. In other words, think about all the places that they're making rules and regulations about how people live, single-family homes, owning property, growing food, ranching, etc. All that's going on the other side of that. But in the background, they're making plans to reintroduce hyenas and cheetahs and all kinds of different species in these same areas. And all of these areas, these are the same areas that had all the megafauna in the last ice age. I don't know if that's connected or anything, but maybe. So they're talking about water buffalo, elephants, all of this stuff. And they're framing it in a way that human beings are so bad and have done so much destruction that it's their legal obligation as world governors. Especially important is Article 8F of the CBD, which lays down demanding ecological restoration obligation for European governments and the EU. As our analysis shows, meeting this obligation not only requires providing sufficient space, connectivity, and room for natural processes, but also restoring the diversity and density of Europe's megafauna as far as possible, which is indeed quite far. So right there, they're telling you that they're going to replace what is there with something else, something that existed in the Pleistocene. So what's there now is several thousand years of civilization of the European people and the things that they've built, farming systems, all the ways that they've cultivated things from wine to cheese, all of that stuff they're talking about replacing with this idea where you let nature be nature and you leave it alone and you keep your population down. Why the problem is and why it's so important for them to use law to do it, it's because human beings have destroyed it. And they're not the only place. Like I said, here in North America, they have ideas of, and if you just type into any search engine, repopulating megafauna or repopulating wild, you'll come across thousands of these programs on all the continents, but mostly centralized in previous Pleistocene areas where hunter-gatherers and things were hunting and living at that time. That's the kind of idea that they seem to be wanting to put back whatever population is left out. Now, I want to give you an idea that's kind of woo-woo in a way. Say this is their goal, to have a massive population reduction, whatever you want to call it. And afterwards, use the technologies at hand today to do something about the environment to try to restore it to some idea of what someone thinks it should be or something that's in their head that they wanted to design. Anything can happen from nuclear war to an asteroid hitting the planet to wipe out humans down to a lower level. And guess what? The governments of the world are not really worried about that because you are the one that's going to perish, not them, not their continuity of government programs. They're going to be in bunkers, and when they come out, they're going to have millions of different animal resources or essences, not unlike the story of Noah's Ark, where they come out and use these manufacturing centers like the Ecto-Life idea, a manufacturing center for creating life forms. They can be designer life forms, or extinct life forms, or just replenish the numbers of already existing animals or survivors on the New World. They have the technology to do this now. Everybody's seen them be able to grow a sheep or a cow or really anything inside of a plastic bag. But that's the opposite of the goal. The goal is population reduction, except for and when they are in complete control of the environment as gods. Like I said, they don't want to come back as a feudal dictator or, some nationality, nation state or an empire. They want world domination, and they want the population that they create to worship them. So if all the people on the surface say were wiped out by some kind of cataclysm, they could pop out, set up these facilities in weeks, and within months start growing not only animals, human beings, and they can reseed Earth's surface with all kinds of plants, trees, and other things that they've been saving. The database of DNA that they've been saving for the past 20 years will come into an area where they'll use it because they need genetic diversity to have a healthy species. So think about that. They have almost the entire human genome mapped. They have samples from almost everybody in the Western world. So they already got what they wanted out of it. And now we're looking forward to this post-reset world, which is very scary if you add in the factor of a possible natural cataclysm on some kind of cycle, whether it be a step down of the sun, like I said, an asteroid, who knows, maybe a serious outbreak that's out of their control. They can just hide. And when they come back out, they copy the book of Noah. That's why I bring back the ancient civilizations into this argument, because at one time, it seems like there was a worldwide technologically advanced civilization that got wiped out.
And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.